I've been listening over the years to seven and to six pieces, and have sensed some of the British composers' influences. I wondered. This is sort of a long way of putting it, but I learned through my work at Yale Oral History of American Music that actually in the 60s, non-Germanic classical music was right out. And so that meant you couldn't study Copeland, you couldn't study Ives, you couldn't study classical composers and get a doctorate in the 60s, probably into the 70s. And I sort of feel as though British classical composers like Britten and Arnold and Bliss and Elgar, these guys also have sort of this predicament of being post-Germanic composers and everyone having to sort of come after Beethoven and Wagner and these guys. Do you feel as though, well, maybe that doesn't matter to you at all, but do you feel as though British classical composers are not taken as seriously as they should be?
Well, it's certainly possible. I can't really answer that, really. I mean, there's I think that, Elgar was obviously incredibly popular. And I think Delius, obviously is taken quite seriously, I think, because he's kind of a niche composer in many ways, And Vaughan Williams, I mean, in England, for example, I mean, the Lark Ascending is constantly voted as the most popular piece of classical music of all time, sometimes even beating Star Wars, it's, so it's, I don't really know. I can't particularly answer that question. You might know more about it than me. I just listen to what I like, really. And, I was, my taste in music, really, the stuff I really like started a bit post-Beethoven, really. I started with Brahms, I suppose, and then particularly people like Mahler, and then probably the Russian composers more than any others, like, Shostakovich, Tchaikovsky, and others, Rachmaninoff.
Prokofiev.
It's a bit more kind of, it moves me more. And then obviously, we mentioned Ravel before, and obviously Debussy as well. There are and Eric Satie and things. There are a lot of people who kind of moved me, I suppose, more than Beethoven. I know Beethoven's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. It just doesn't. I don't sit down and listen to a Beethoven symphony really ever. Whereas I will listen to like Sibelius symphony or something many times.
Yeah, that's interesting. Beethoven's Seventh, though.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm so acquainted with the ones that I'm acquainted with, and the Ninth is the one everyone talks about, and I don't quite get it. But hey, I'm not here to it's my loss. So because all the people I like Mahler and everything, would say that was the key piece of music of all time. It's just. I think sometimes it's how you hear things the first time and how you respond to them. I don't know. The first time I ever heard Mahler was in the film Death in Venice, which I'd never heard this music before. And I just thought, this is fantastic. What is it? And then went desperately out to try and buy it and couldn't find it anywhere. There was virtually no Mahler available in England at that time. There was a cheap record label that had a version of the Fourth Symphony on it. And that was all it was. And I went to the record library to get hold of a copy of the Fifth Symphony so that I could sort of hear the thing in its entirety. And that's where my sort of love affair with Mahler started, with that. And as I said, up to that point, he wasn't really, in this country anyhow, a very well-known composer. Since then,
that's very interesting. Yeah. So who lands and who doesn't in different territories is interesting.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I mean, I often think that I remember, I think it was in the Right Stuff where the piece Venus from the Planets was used when the re-entry of the rocket or something. Right. And I know that Jerry Goldsmith got the Oscar for that film. And I always thought it was because of that piece of music, because it's so brilliant. And no one really knew. The Planets is not as well known at that stage anyhow in America as it is in England, So everyone in England knew that piece. Well, not everyone, obviously, but a lot of people heard that and just thought, what a wonderful, thing. But he was credited as the writer of the music in that film. And I don't know, that was far and away the best piece of music in it.
Well, that is quite a bunch of pieces. I mean, I frequently go back to the final movement with the sirens. and you have a piece called Sirens, and
Siren, yeah.
yeah,
Well, it was just I mean, the trouble with my orchestral pieces is finding titles is always a bit more difficult. So in that particular record, I decided to just have it as a sort of very basic plot lineup. So you had a siren who was the kind of seductive female, and you had Blade, who was the sort of Zorro type with a sword, and then the other pieces fit in between it as being part of the action, if you like. I don't know, it doesn't really mean much beyond that. Apart from the fact, I thought that the sort of had a kind of sinuous quality about it, that particular piece, Siren. So it was, seduction was part of what it was all about.
So when you say what it's all about, I'm curious, to what degree is it programmatic or trying to take you on a journey or tell you a tale that you would make up in your imagination, since there are no lyrics? How is this a different ball game for you? I
don't think of it in language at all. It is pure music for me, all of it. I just write what appeals to me, and that's and one thing goes to the other. It's nothing to do with. That's why I don't really like having titles. I wanted to call, when I wrote out 7, I just wanted to call the tracks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but they wouldn't let me. So I got away with the title a bit. I just, because I think it makes people think a certain way. When you talk about, I mentioned Vaughan Williams and the Lark Ascending. Now, he probably wanted people to think about the Lark Ascending. Maybe he did or not. I don't know. But I wouldn't want to give a title out to anything I had, so that people sort of think that way, really. I mean, so I try to keep the titles fairly sort of amorphous, and the titles like Springtide, for example, doesn't sort of carry too much with it, I don't think. So for me, that was quite an important thing. So I do just think totally in musical terms, and not. I've got no concept of a specific visual outcome, visual thing.
So to go so far as something like Wild Pilgrimage or The Oracle, no?
No, not at all. I was desperate for a title. Wild Pilgrimage I stole from, as an author. What's the guy's called? I can't think his name is suddenly. But he wrote a series of books. The Prelude to a Million Years came from his books as well. And when I think of his name, I'll come back to it. So trouble being 72, you see, it all goes now. But he was a graphic artist, and I love his books. And his books just have they're stories without words. So that kind of, in a sense, was sort of like just done in pictures. So in a sense, there's some similarity there. But I always liked the titles. Wild Pilgrimage, and I liked Prelude to a Million Years, which is a slightly pretentious title, but it's nevertheless, it sort of works for the piece, I think.
Yeah, and you strike on something very interesting about instrumental music being an abstract thing that is making the listener a participant.
Yes, I suppose so. I don't know, when I hear a piece of classical music, nothing really conjures up. I mean, there are times when I suppose a person's specifically gone for something where they're trying to encapture something like the sea or something like that. I suppose when you can sort of hear that a bit. But I for me, it's just the way the music works and the way it moves, and the way it builds and gets to climaxes and comes back down again and everything. For me, that's what I like. And, so most symphonic music doesn't necessarily have any kind of subtitle to it at all. So, it is just, you just respond to it in the way that it's as music. And that to me is how I respond.
So if I could just be a little geeky composerly for a moment, then, so your process then, what happens in terms of form, what happens in terms of development, what happens in your mind that gets the job done for you to say, this is a piece that stands up?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point, really. I mean, it all comes out of improvisation, really. So you hit stuff, and a lot of the stuff you make, the noise you make, isn't very good. I have sometimes with some of the pieces just recorded loads of improvisation, and then kind of pick the best of it. If I think it's good, something good there, I pick it out and I kind of sort of relearn it and put it into some sort of order. Or sometimes I just use a whole section, which which is improvised, because I like the way that it flows, This particularly the piece on 7 called Black Down, where a large part of that came out of just one improvisation, and then I used some of the bits more than once. But it was kind of, I just thought it sounded really good when I heard it back. It's just one pass on using a string synthesizer effectively, and just playing the whole thing on that. And it just sort of, I thought, this sounds good, I'm going to go with it. Other times you have to sort of, you hack it about and you write a bit and you write another bit and you put the bits together and then you try things out. And sometimes the bit you originally started off with gets thrown out completely. This happened with Prelude to a Million Years. The sort of what became the sort of the first of the main themes was completely different. And it just sort of, everything kind of got moved about and everything. And then it became a secondary bit anyhow. And smaller, but a lot of it is, a piece like that is, a lot of it is kind of a bit of a stream of consciousness thing. You kind of go one way and you start something else and you do it. And sometimes you come back and develop the bit a bit further in the middle there. I don't know. I don't really know quite what it is that makes a piece feel complete. It's sort of easier with a song, and one or two of the pieces I've written, even for the orchestral, have had more of a shape to them, so you know where they're going and how they come back, like the Oracle, you mentioned that. Others, it's just really, I let myself go, really. And I love the fact I don't have to try and wrap it up with, verse, chorus, middle eight, and all the rest of it. And I sometimes like that discipline, but just sometimes just to be able to ramble on for hours appeals to me. And you have to find some people who are prepared to go there with you, with you.
But I also feel like there's a running theme throughout all of your music where you're sort of contrarian in some ways.
Well, I suppose I do like to not do the obvious, and I think that's why, it's why some people really don't like what I do, and other people do, I think, because it's just, I don't like to, as soon as I find it's going somewhere where I've been before or someone else has been before, I kind of steer clear of it. Whereas I know a lot of pop music, it's when it does that is when it's a hit, because you get close enough and then you do it, and then it becomes a hit. Unfortunately, having worked with Mike and Phil all these years and everything, they're able to steer me to the straight and narrow occasionally, because I write a nice bit and they say, no, you're not going over there. We'll do it again, and then make a verse chorus out of it. And that works well as well. I mean, I need discipline sometimes, but left to my own devices, I do tend to go away. And I mean, I called, when I did a compilation of my solo stuff, I called it A Chord Too Far, because that really is the situation. I remember a great time when I played the song Red Day on Blue Street, which is a song on one of my solo albums, to my manager, Tony Smith. And you can always tell how he's enjoying a thing with his foot. He has a foot that taps through everything. And he's going really, really good, until it goes to the final part of the chorus, where it does a weird chord change. And I could see, I just knew I'd lost him at that point, And of course, for me, that was the point when I got really excited. But I don't know. It's perverse. If I was having, I mean, I can't say I wouldn't have liked to have a bit more commercial success with the solo stuff, but I kind of was getting an awful lot. I got, with the group, we were having so much success that I felt on the solo stuff I could be a bit more experimental, and that's what I tried to do.
But you're also on the record for saying that your solo stuff, all your A-list stuff, you put into Genesis.
Well, I did in the early days, certainly. Yeah, that was true up to and including, up to certainly all the things up to Wind and Wuthering. And when I did a Curious Feeling after that, kind of was, I mean, it was a very productive writing period for me. That I was seemed a lot of stuff was coming out, and I was really enjoying it. And we had this hiatus when Phil was off trying to save his first marriage, when I had time to organize what I'd written at that point and made a record out of it. I'd had this one piece that started it all off, which I've written in this film, The Shout, and I'd written this piece, which ended up being called From the Undertow, which was a starting point for the whole idea. And I kind of used some of the chord changes and that throughout the whole record. And I really enjoyed doing that. And I thought that was really exciting. But then afterwards, I think later on, when we came back, and we did Duke, obviously, but then we tended to take quite long breaks between records. So kind of the things didn't really interfere. And when we got to, particularly from the last two or three we did, Genesis, We Can't Dance, and Invisible Touch were very much the three of us in the room just writing together. And a lot of those ideas just totally came spontaneously while in the room, which I found very exciting because, when you're writing on your own and you get a good bit, you get a shiver down your spine, and this is fantastic, it's great. But when there's three of you there and suddenly a thing works, you think, what's going on? And it's just magic, total magic. And we had that lots of times, and I really enjoyed that. I mean, all the rest of the time, of course, it was sounding like horrible noise. And that's very important, I think, when you're playing with people that you know as well, and you're not trying to prove anything to them because they know just how good or bad you are. You can make mistakes, you can just play rubbish. And when it comes together, the only trick is to be able to know when something is working. I think that's what writing is all about. I think even as a solo composer on your own, you've just got to know whether something is actually got a merit to it. And when you're writing as a group, that's quite an interesting thing. And one of you may spot it and not the other two. And that's quite interesting too, because then you spot it and the person you go back to it. We tended to try and tape just about everything we did in those days. And you could go back and listen on the tape and you could hear what you did and where the good moment came.
That's very interesting. So the collaborative aspect of Genesis comes back again around the time of the Genesis album. And I always wanted to ask you about what I consider a deep track and just a masterful song, Silver Rainbow.
Right. Well, in terms of musically, I mean, it was just a series of bits and pieces that I'd written, I suppose, or wrote in the studio. Some of it I wrote in the studio. Phil had this rhythm going, and I played this riff on top of it. And in terms of a lyric, I was really just trying to write what you might call an old-fashioned lyric, where it's sort of like where just how people lose control when they're in love, just because it was sort of thing that might have been written 20, 30 years before in terms of a lyric. And so the idea of the silver rainbow being, and it was just a bit of fun, really, that side of it. But I think it's a good melody. And
quite good.
It sort of evolved. It was one that evolved in the room with all of us playing, I suppose. I suppose by the nature of the parts in that particular one, most of the changes came from me, and there's a few of those chord changes that you either like or don't like that happen in that song. That when we put it out, when we played it to the record company, they thought it would be a single, but in the end, it didn't. It never was released as a single.
It was considered a single at one point, huh?
It wasn't. It was. We thought it could have been a single. That was at one point, but it never was. No, because I think probably because we decided to go with Mama on that album, and then we had That's All was an obvious sort of follow up, and after that, everything else was a bit of a once you've gone two singles off an album, everything else is a bit kind of irrelevant, really.
But songs like Tonight, 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 and It's Gonna Get Better. These songs are not typical pop songs.
No, well, I think again a lot of it is atmosphere, I suppose. And so much Tonight. Phil had this drum pattern that I thought was really good, but it sort of immediately made me want to play marimba sounds against it. I don't know why. So I had a marimba sample that was there, and I just started playing a couple of chords on top of the marimba, using the marimba as a sort of as the sound, and it had such a strong atmosphere. Then you from then on you kind of know where you're at. How the song develops after that is sort of the whole of what you might call the verse parts of that just came fairly naturally from that beginning, and then we did the middle part was actually a sort of separate section that we wrote. And then I thought it was quite fun to have Mike and Phil have got this very kind of, quite a sort of hip, jerky sort of rhythm going, which is great. And I thought it'd be really nice to play a very sustained and very flat piece over the top, which is just like it was like a landscape, with this sort of thing furrowing through the middle. And, so very classical sort of style with a little bits of oboe and flute and all the rest of it in it, which was a lot of fun, really. And then allowing that to build to a big crescendo to come back in with the verses again. I really like that song. I thought it was a good song at the time. It's Gonna Get Better was, I had this thing I'd done a sample of on my emulator, which is what opens it up. That's
emulator at the beginning?
Yeah. What I've been trying to do was to get a cello sound. And I'd recorded what was, in fact, if we come back to 2001 here, it's the first 3 notes of the Cacciaturian piece, whatever I think it's called. And I was trying to get those things. So I had those 3 notes, I got them sampled. And then I found by playing a 4-note chord on it, you just got this wonderful overlapping kind of sound. And I wanted to try and do the whole song with that, but we couldn't really do it. The mic started playing the riff over it, which was nice, but it didn't really fit it. And so we sort of went away from it, and that's what it became, really. But
and it comes back nicely, too.
It reminds me a little bit of, which I obviously heard a lot later, the Goretzky Third Symphony, which is the one where he has, and the way that all those things interweave is just wonderful, you know. And it was sort of a bit like that on a very sort of limited scale. And I like the way that things, because you had the emulator, as you know, obviously, if you play an octave up, it goes at twice the speed, and if you play intervals in between, it goes at intermediate speeds. And it's just the way it also changes the pitch. So the combination of changes of pitch with the changes of speed just produced a really nice sort of cyclical effect, which I really liked. Cyclical.
You know, I just had a conversation with Todd Rundgren. I play drums for him from time to time. And he did a whole album using the emulator called Acapella.
Right.
And he talked about how difficult it was to work with in terms of it being monophonic. Did you have a polyphonic version?
Well, no, just put it through a phaser, a flanger, chorus, something, you know. Then it's stereo, isn't it? Yeah, the E1, I mean, it was a fantastic thing at the time because it just was the first experience I had of any kind of sampling, and I used it a lot. You know, we used it. It provided an idea sometimes, even if it didn't end up on the final piece. You know, the song That's All, for example, was just a thing it was again a combination of playing something on a recording stuff and then playing it back and getting this little riff sort of came out of it. And then I sort of played it on the piano instead. So that was another one. I mean, obviously the opening of No Son of Mine being another example of using the emulator with that sort of very slowed down guitar sound, which sounds like an elephant, which kind of came from the emulator. Just found that when I played that particular sound with a particular chord, it just had an amazing atmosphere about it, and so that's what made the song happen. So the sampling, I like the sampling is good because it surprises you. You don't know what you're going to get and what you do sometimes, and that can be very effective.
Were you ever interested in the Fairlight?
Well, I was interested, but at the time when these things first came out, I went the other route and went for the synclavier, and they told me that the sampling part of the synclavier was going to come out next week. It was obviously a fantastic synthesizer, the synclavier. It had wonderful sounds. And so I thought, well, I'll get that. It's an extremely expensive instrument, and I'll wait for their sampling bit rather than going the Fairlight route. And of course, it was about 5 years before the synclavier had the sampling. And so meanwhile, I got myself an E1, which, you know, we could do some basic sampling and had a lot of fun with that. So the Fairlight, no, I didn't. You know, some of the sounds on the Fairlight, you know, obviously I've used over the years. There's a sort of breathy sound that I've used a few times, which was a sort of classic Fairlight sound. But no, so I did play it once or twice, but I didn't ever own one.
But you guys took sampling pretty seriously at a certain point, yes?
Well, I think sampling was, you know, for sounds. I just enjoyed the fact I could do it. I mean, like the little koto sound in the middle of Mama, you know, was a sample. That was Mike played the koto and I sampled it and then used it. And you just found a place it sort of seemed to work. It was more for sounds than for kind of, you know, obviously sampling now tends to mean kind of people sample riffs and stuff, you know. Didn't really tend to do that much, I don't think. I probably once or twice did it, but not really a thing. For me, it was more for sound. And but then you see, as the synthesizers got better and better, you had less need to do it. I mean, they had everything on them. You know, I mean, nowadays modern systems have every sound in the universe you could possibly want. I mean, I used to quite like it when you had an instrument that couldn't, you know, you had to modify the sounds in order to get it to work. Like the early Prophets, you know, which I used to use a lot. They were great because they had, you know, synthesizers where you had your old-fashioned sort of ADSR sort of stuff and everything. And could produce some really good sounds out of it like that. I used to really enjoy that. But then I think it was the DX7 that killed it for everyone because trying to program that was a nightmare. And so one tended to use the existing sounds and maybe slight modifications. And they were good sounds, so that was great. And I don't know. Then you got after that they got more and more sophisticated, and I got lazier and lazier, I suppose. And if I found a good sound, and as I said before, often it was finding the sound that would write the song. So a lot of these instruments had great sounds on them, and you just would find a sound and you were away, you know.
That's so interesting, because then this whole area of Tony Banks' lead sounds, if we go from the Hammond organ to the art pro soloist to pieces like the Brazilian, where you find yet another sort of beautiful lead sound. And I think that it puts you on equal footing with guys like Jan Hammer and Joe Zawinul in terms of making the keyboard as an equal to the guitar.
Well, yes. I mean, the thing about the guitar, which you can't really do on a keyboard, is it's that expressiveness. It's something about you can just hold one note and just a little bit of it. It's very difficult on a keyboard. It's very difficult to do that somehow. It's the nature of it. You can add a bit of vibrato and all the rest of it. So I think you're more dependent on having interesting. The sound itself is more important, and you have to kind of sort of use that. I mean, you can. I mean, I suppose over the years, you're often trying to imitate another instrument is how you create a good sound. I mean, on the song "Blood on the Rooftops," there's a little oboe passage which is done on the pro soloist, but with a lot of echo and a bit of gunge and everything. And it sounds really nice. It almost sounds like an oboe.
It does.
Going for that, and then you get, and other times you're trying to sort of sound like a guitar. I mean, on a lot of my solo albums, I've used things trying to sound like a guitar. To varying degrees of success, I suppose, but they do either a bit of fuzz or sometimes just a bit of picking. I mean, sometimes it is a guitar sample, other times it isn't. You kind of looking for something, something either you want something that does the job, or you're playing along and you think that sounds really good with this piece, and then you play it. Serendipity. I'm a great believer in serendipity. I think it produces a lot of stuff and you can't always know. You can't always plan everything. You can't always think about what's going to come next. You have to let chance have its effect, I think.
Was the waiting room fun for you live?
The most fun it ever was when we first wrote it, and I wish we'd recorded it because it was so good. We sat down. We were in this sort of rather spooky house in England.
Wasn't it Aleister Crowley's house?
Yeah, I think it was. It was Led Zeppelin house, and it was an extraordinary house, really, because you had rats kind of like lived everywhere in it. And they used to run up and down. They had a wisteria plant on the outside and used to run up and down there. They almost were so friendly. They put out their milk, for change in the morning. They were, anyhow, so it was a bit spooky place. And one time we switched off all the lights and said, let's just make ourselves scared. Okay. So we sat down and then we made these things, and Steve was good at this sort of stuff. He'd get a grin on his face and he'd be going, and I did have this pro soloist and all sorts of stuff, so I could make funny noises, and Pete was making funny noises. It was just great. And the first time we did it was wonderful, and we were scared. It was really good.
Really scared.
Mike, in this particular case, it worked very well. He was too scary for him, so he started playing a sort of happy thing. As he started this dang, ding, dang, ding thing like that. And then so we all suddenly joined in with him and started playing this very triumphant sort of piece with these kind of very, very major key chord changes, which sort of emerged out of it. And it was so good. And then we tried to do it afterwards and never really got it. It was all right. But there were days when we did it live when it sort of seemed to almost work. And then it was the way it changed over was totally spontaneous. And that's something we could never recreate because we knew it was going to happen. Whereas the first time we did it, didn't know it was going to happen.
Did you try to recreate that thunderclap that's part of this iconic story?
No. I mean, it was probably a thunder shoot somewhere. Phil would have had one lying around. I don't think it was just one of those things. It was just very frightening. It was good. And maybe it wasn't, actually. The truth of the matter is it probably wasn't that good, but it felt good at the time.
Now, does that become a structured improvisation at that point?
Yeah, it became sort of less structured than, we don't do much improvising on stage, never have done, but we used to try and keep a few that's a little bit loose. On the Lamb Line on Broadway, there was about 4 or 5 pieces that were kept not too structured. That was one. Fly on a Windshield was another, and then there was a Victory at Sea thing, whatever it's called. I don't know what we ended up calling it. Oh, Silent Soar and Empty Boats, where I had a pretty much idea what I was doing, but we wouldn't do it at the same time, the same speed. So it was kind of quite nice the way, because some days it sort of seemed to come together in a way that was nice. And on the record, the versions were all pretty good, actually. So we ended up, trying to do that. But I think improvisation has never been really what we're about. I mean, in many ways, improvising all happens in the writing stage, and once you get on the stage, it's up to you. Some people love that. I don't know, really. I always think when I hear people improvising, it often seems to me they played the same thing as they played. It's just you can only do so much, in terms of runs on guitars and everything. And if you've got a style, tend to come back to the same things all the time.
Yeah, no, I was always curious about that, because the Lamb in its scope covers a lot of ground, and part of it is that it gets loose. And there are versions that the fans know about now that are appearing on YouTube, etc., where you guys are in the waiting room for 12 minutes.
Oh, right. God knows, you don't know how long you are sometimes with these things. I didn't know it was that long, but it was, it did vary quite a bit. And I think it was quite good the way we did those sort of things. You had the very structured songs, and then you'd have these moments when it would go somewhere else, really. 12 minutes sounds a long time, though, for the waiting room, I have to say.
I was surprised when I heard that it stuck in there that long, and it was good.
Yeah. Well,
but yeah, it's interesting how when you're working in different ways, like you're a very interesting example of a person who's open to different process types. So it could be you're improvising, it could be you're working everything out with the band in the room. It could be somebody brings something in and we all work on it. Do you ever work away from the instrument to compose?
No, I'm not always. It tends to be an instrument. Occasionally you have an idea in your brain, and then you kind of a sort of intellectual idea, and then you try it out. The only example I can think of that really was the opening part of not the very opening, but the first vocal section in Firth of Fifth. I had an idea in my mind. What happens if I do that? It'll lower the do that. That should work. And then I tried it out, and I thought, actually sounds rather good, that. So I used that as a thing. But most of the time, I'm just fiddling around either on my own or with other people, and things develop from that, I suppose. Yeah.
Within a song, did you guys collaborate on lyrics, or was the one person takes the reins kind of thing?
Normally, we did have a few we collaborated on. Normally, one would take the sort of the dominant role. Peter and I collaborated on lyric of Fountain of Salmacis and on Seven Stones, but I'd say Peter was the major one on that. But I introduced a few sort of not beheld before and stuff like that. Then, and a couple of ones I did with Mike. He helped me on Firth the Fifth and Cinema Show. But again, I would say I was dominant on those lyrics, as it sometimes. But then it varied, Most of the time, though, certainly in more recent times, one person would go away and write the lyrics. In many ways, because I think lyric writing, it's more of an effort. You know what I mean? I mean, writing music to me is sort of just, I find it easy. I mean, I love doing it, Writing lyrics is always, you've got to think about it. And, when you're writing lyrics, there's always another cup of coffee to be made, and kind of a walk around the garden is required. And Peter was wonderful. He had to do a trip to the Amazon one time in order to try and write some lyrics for one of his albums, I think. I think it's just, I enjoy it. I love I find it quite a fulfilling thing to do, but it's always hard work. It's more like, I know that a lot of authors have trouble, and I think it's more like that, really, whereas music isn't like that for me. But I do enjoy sort of trying to get an idea for a lyric and then trying to work it through. It's
the hardest part.
Definitely, for me. Well, not for everybody. I would have thought for some people, like, I don't know, there's people I admire like Leonard Cohen or Paul Simon or that. I mean, I feel they find it pretty easy to write lyrics. But I don't know, maybe they don't. I feel with Leonard Cohen, the lyric comes first almost, actually, because more a poet than he was a musician in some ways. But
Or Dylan.
Very effective combination.
Yeah, Dylan, I think also the words came from.
Yeah, probably Dylan. I didn't include Dylan because I'm not a massive Dylan fan, I have to be honest. But but he obviously, yes. I mean, I don't hate him. I just don't like him as much as most other people do.
I've separated the lyrics from the sound of the voice, and some of those lyrics, when you read them, are pretty gut wrenching.
Yeah, I'm sure the lyrics are good. I mean, I think I don't know what it is really. I don't. Perhaps music has to come first for me, and I can take the Beach Boys singing "A Day in the Life of a Tree," which must be one of the worst lyrics ever written, more than I can take a sort of a really good lyric with a poor melody. Put it like that. So it's kind of that's the way I am really. I can listen to whole songs without having any idea what the lyrics are about at all. My wife's always saying that to me. She says, I said, I love it. I hate that, or I love that. And she says, what's it about? And I have to say, I have no idea. It's just a great piece of music,
Yeah.
And so but then I do sometimes listen to music. Some people, you feel the need to listen to the music, listen to the lyrics much more than others, I think. And that's the skill of the writer, I suppose. I don't know.
Well, the surround mixes have been so wonderful with Nick Davis, and in my system, the bass pedals are just right. I can hear all the words, I can hear all the lyrics, and just great job in terms of letting us hear that music, I think, better than we ever have. And I wondered if you must be very proud of how it's turned out.
Yeah. Well, yes, I was. I mean, it's a while ago now. I mean, I was kind of the only band member who was there all the time. I went there with Nick when we were doing it, in order to try and keep it kind of. I felt I had to sort of needed someone there to sort of keep the whole thing level. I mean, Nick is brilliant, and I'm sure he could have done a great job without me. But sometimes I needed to be there, and not just to say the keyboard's too quiet, I just felt I was responsible, for everybody's part in a way, and I wanted to make certain everything could be heard and we didn't lose anything.
Well, you know the mix rule, right?
What?
Do you know the mixing rule?
What is that?
The mixing rule is that anyone who is not present during the mix will listen to the mix later and find themselves to be under mixed.
Well, of course. I remember doing one mix a long time ago, actually, where we were all had hands on our own faders. That was fatal. But when you listen to music, obviously, that when you hear it, you hear yourself very loud, particularly when you're playing it live. You hear yourself louder than everybody else. So it's a bit strange. And you have to sort of try and sort of back off that a bit. And I think to some extent you can do that because I think if you're the writer as well, then you just want the best of it. I didn't find, particularly going back to it, I wasn't. The great thing about doing the remixes and some of those early albums, particularly Trespass, where the vocals were incredibly quiet because that's what we thought we wanted. And when we heard them back, we realized we didn't, but it was too late by then. And I thought we'd never be able to go back to them to rectify that. And to be able to do that, because something like Stagnation, that first part, the thing was so quiet. And now it sounds fantastic, I think, and I think the difference was very apparent on those first two or three albums, particularly the first two. Well, I'm not including Genesis Revelation, but the Trespass and Nursery Crime, I think we were able to improve them a lot. And all the ones really up until, well, we obviously didn't bother to remix the later ones with a lot of the stuff for, the week, the Invisible Touch and everything, because the mix on that was really good.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to hear with that kind of clarity. And also, vinyl was tough for volume and low end.
Well, it was a problem for us really, but because we tended to try to put too much on every album, also tended to have a big song at the end. I think I remember the Fountain of Sun Masters, the end of one side on that. And of course, technically, you've got less groove. The groove is half the length as the one on the outside. So you want your loudest things on the outside, so you can actually have greater separation of the grooves, as it were, of the things that make up the sound. So for us, when CD came out and everything, it was a real fantastic thing. I'm not, much as I love albums, and I love the way they feel and the way they look, they're not. I mean, if you want sound, I love CD, and I know people are purists. They don't seem to like CDs or whatever equivalent. I mean, I'm not into MP3s, obviously, but anything where you can get the full sound, to me, is great. And as you say, the surround sound mixes, that's even better.
Yeah, that kind of separation really does give more of a vivid experience, I think.
Mm.
So Genesis has been touring again. How has that been for you?
Well, it's been going very well. I mean, it's kind of like, obviously Phil can't do anything things he used to do. Like he can't drum, can't really walk, actually, to be honest. But he's given all that. He's still got a charisma about him that works, and the reviews have been extraordinarily good. First time in our career, we've actually got good reviews, and so that was great. We did a lot in America. We're going back we had to curtail our British tour because of COVID, but we're going to go back there, starting in a month's time. But we're doing a bit of Germany and France and Holland beforehand, if they let us in. There's some question whether Germany is ready for COVID relaxation or not, but that's the plan, and that's it. That will be it. No more Genesis playing live. I think Phil has had I mean, it's been quite difficult for him, I think, and but it's been fantastic fun actually, because his son, obviously Nick, has been drumming, and he's a brilliant drummer, and it's like playing with a young Phil, really, and that's been really good. And we've got a couple of backing singers who do some of those harmony things you're talking about, which is really nice. I think it seems to have gone down well, and I think we're playing well. The rest, we sound good, looks great. If you haven't seen it, come and see it. But of course, you're in America. But it's I think it's obviously it's not because Phil can't do what he did. It's not the same as those earlier shows. But I think if you like the group, it just works on a certain level. And we do a sort of song like Fading Lights, obviously, which is a kind of goodbye song. It's quite moving, I think. And it sort of works with an element of the audience. Some people said they're in tears about 3 or 4 times during the set because it's so awful. No, because it's quite moving, I think. It depends on what you like and what you want to hear, but it's we try to do a bit of a balance of our career. Obviously, there's an emphasis on the later period, but we do a few old bits and pieces that people want to hear.
Well, I mean, speaking of being in tears, I mean, Automatic, without the ability to control it, every time you hit the end of Supper's Ready, I would just become a pool of tears. Because it's just, to me, it's so triumphant and such a great callback, because these are the chords we heard in Guaranteed Eternal Sanctuary Man that are treated differently now. And there's something about it that just always just destroys me.
Yeah, well, I think it works really well. It's surprising, really. I mean, that section was a bit I wrote on guitar, actually, when I was at university, but I'd written it about 4 years before, just using they're all open string. You're able to keep the open strings going in the bass throughout that. Right. And the way we do it at the end is much more like I wrote it on guitar. And the bit of Sanctuary Man was a kind of more variation on it, if you like. But the sort of the going through all the whole thing, which I think is a really strong thing, was obviously an addition at the time. And it's just great lyric, I think. I mean, it's an over-the-top lyric, but it really works. And also, you must remember that you've taken 25 minutes to get there. And I think that actually is part of the thing. Never underestimate foreplay, is what I say. Well, it's true, isn't it?
It's so true.
We did one stage do just the Apocalypse and the end section on tour for a little bit, but it didn't really work as well, even though you thought that might work, because that's really where it starts to gather momentum. You kind of needed all the stuff beforehand to set the tone, and then it just seems to work. And it's like long pieces. It's like a lot of classical music obviously is long, and it needs that kind of build-up, the ability to get there. It's not just about the main theme. It's about everything else as well.
Well, of course, it goes far afield into a scherzo kind of entr'acte of comedy in the middle.
Yeah, well, the comedy thing was, I mean, Willow Farm, which is obviously it was a section of Peter's, which it was originally a standalone song, but the idea of putting it in the middle of that kind of changed it completely, from being a sort of another stagnation musical box, made it into something else entirely and took us elsewhere. And I think that was a very important change, that. And then we were able to do the it became very electric at that point. Up to that point, it had been more acoustic, more Fairport, if you like. And then once you've done the rather sort of bizarre Willow Farm, we kind of went electric after that and became sort of more heavy, which really worked well. The Apocalypse at 9/8 is still one of my favourites of all our instrumentals ever. I think it just sort of, and the way it builds to the 6/6/6 section is very strong.
That's very moving section.
I'm going to have to go quite soon. Okay, I think we've been
yes. So just wanted to ask quickly, now that you're looking back at this music and you're performing it again, what are you doing in terms of your keyboard setup?
Well, I'm now using really most of it's on Mainstage, which is the sort of the Apple kind of, which is an extraordinary thing, really, with the sampling ability and everything. So where I'm only using sort of one song, one sound from a thing like the old synclavier sounds on Mama and Home by the Sea, they're great on that. The only instrument I'm really using, I've still got the old Korg Oasis, which I used on the previous tour, and because I haven't bothered to transfer a lot of those sounds just because they sound fine. Instruments worked for me so far. Touch a piece of wood somewhere. And, so that's what it is. So it is mainly Korg Oasis and Mainstage with the keyboards I'm actually playing are the two in front of me have got no sounds on them at all. They're not of consequence. They just
controllers.
And the fact now that you've got virtually no latency, so you can play really fast. You can play the sort of solos like the cinema show stuff and everything, and you don't have the latency, that was used to be the problem with samples. When playing from a remote keyboards and everything, but now it's virtually instant and it's amazing. It's an extraordinary tool actually. I think it's works very well.
Do you have any opinion about the Mellotron plugin samples and those sorts of ideas?
I'm not terribly excited by these things. I mean, the thing about the Mellotron for me was I actually hated the instrument, let's be honest about it. The sound was fantastic at the time, but you listen, it's a pretty scrappy string sound and a brass sound and everything. And okay, they've got a character about them. And if you want to recreate Watch of the Skies, it's the best way to do it. And or something like Space Oddity and everything, it's those scratchy sounds that sort of were part of that. But I don't need that. I'm not really, these retro samples are not really designed for me. I mean, I have to say, most recent years I've been working with orchestral sounds anyhow, so kind of I'm looking for an authentic flute rather than looking for an authentic mellotron. I mean, the instrument's fantastic at the time, what we could do with it. I mean, talking about the flute, I mean, that harmonizing with Peter on Get 'Em Out by Friday, that was just great, because it was good enough for that, with the real flute as well. To be able to do things like that early on was wonderful, but it was not a great instrument. I mean, once I could not use it, I didn't. Put it like that.
Right, and it would break down whenever.
Oh, the early ones broke down every night. It was useless. That was such a sophisticated thing, and wasn't designed to go on the road. The little smaller one, the white ones, so you had sort of cassettes, worked a lot better. And they were pretty reliable, and you had the good sounds, But you could make them up according to your own, your own thing. So I had the voices one, which I used obviously on Dance with the Moon at Night, and the string and brass, which was used on Watcher and things like that. So they were. It was a lovely thing at the time, but you can get so much better sounds now with samples that I don't see. I don't know. I don't crave it. Put it like that. People are always sending me samples of these things, and I have to say, well, I don't know.
I understand that completely. I was wondering what will be happening for you after Genesis stops. Will you continue with your your orchestral music? Will you be reading and gardening? What will you be doing?
Well, I'll certainly be doing a lot of reading and gardening. I don't know, really. I haven't actually written anything. I know a lot of people found the lockdown and everything, good period for creation, but for me, I haven't really done much since I did 5, and I was really happy with that. And I just sort of feel like I've done 1 or 2 little things since then. Worked with a guy called John Potter, who's done these classical singing things, which are quite nice. But that's the sort of thing I might do, a bit more of that kind of thing. I don't know that I'm ready for a whole orchestral thing again. I don't know. I sort of feel maybe you get to the stage where you feel maybe you're just repeating yourself. You haven't got anything kind of new to say in a way. I mean, in terms of chord changes and everything, which I used to be every time when I hit a piano back when I was sort of 25 or something, I'd find a new chord, a new way of doing something, but I don't really find that anymore. So it's not quite the same for me, but I may get the urge again. I mean, I love writing music. I love recording music. I don't really like putting it out because you never get quite the response you hope, But it's quite sort of. I probably can't stop myself, but I'm not intending to do it. And the idea of smaller pieces quite appeals to me. Maybe I should do a string quartet or something like that. I don't know. It's sort of.
Oh, I would like to hear a Tony Banks string quartet.
I say that I have no idea how even to start actually. So, but one can try things. I'm sort of the other thing is as one gets older, you think, well, I mean, the time becomes limited at a certain point in your life, and you think, how much longer have you got to go, and what do you want to do with it, really? But I mean, I do love just playing, so hopefully I'll do a bit of that.
So you've enjoyed playing on these shows?
Well, yes, enjoy is a strange word. Everyone says, did you enjoy it? I don't really know. I find it very satisfying to do it. I get quite nervous, to find it. I mean, I suppose I always have done, actually, but I think this time it sort of seems I feel more exposed than sometimes, actually. And so if you make a mistake, it's sort of, oh, God, And I suppose one's memory is not quite as good. I think my technique's as good or as bad as it has ever been, really. So it's just a matter of remembering it, actually. That's the thing I did a couple of times, and you have a complete blank and you think, what the hell did I do here? When we did Follow Me one night, I couldn't remember what the hell the solo was at all. Came down a completely the wrong run. Sounded all right, fortunately. But, things like that. It's not a problem to play. It's just a matter of memory. And, there's 4 or 5 moments in the set when I've got to really focus. But I do enjoy that. And it's wonderful to see people there and the response you get and everything, particularly when you do, it's going to be difficult now because when we do our last show, this probably will be the last show we ever do. And that'll be quite a difficult moment, I think. But I thought that was the case on the last tour. So, maybe I'll be all right.
Where's the last city?
London. So we're playing the O2 there. We're doing 3 shows like we were supposed to do earlier on. If we'd done them there before Christmas, we might never have done these next shows at all. But it's nice to get out there and just do a little bit of Europe because Europe has always been very good to us, particularly Germany. And it'd be nice to do Germany. But as I said, slight question mark over the COVID rules, but hopefully it'll work okay.
Well, I have to thank you, Tony Banks, for taking the time. And I also just want to thank you for all the music that has enriched so many of our lives.
Well, thank you very much. It's been fun for us to do as well. So that's the important thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And thank you for talking with me in such detail about stuff. I do have so much curiosity about the process and all of these. Yeah.
Well, I hope I gave you some answers, but a lot of the time I don't really know how it happens, how it works. I'm actually, when I hear back our stuff, I'm amazed. I'm amazed, actually. I think, where did this come from? Who did this? That's actually really quite good, I think, And how did I do that? Or how did we do that? It's a strange thing, really, They talk about imposter syndrome, I suppose, and you always feel a bit like that, I think. You're never quite sure what it's all about.
Well, you go to another place when you make the music, and then maybe when you hear it 30 years later, you're in a different place that when you made it.
Yeah.
Perception is...
Even more recent stuff, I sort of hear it and I think, God, incredible. It's just the fact that it all sort of fits together. And when you stand back from a thing, when you're close to it, you see all its faults. And when you stand back from a thing, you don't hear it the same way at all. And you hear it just as anyone else would hear it in a way. And you can judge it in a slightly different manner.
Well, we'll be listening to your music for many years to come, Tony Banks. And I thank you, sir. Much respect and admiration. And so glad that we had a chance to talk today. Means a lot.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks a lot. It's been fun.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been the ProgCast with my special guest, Tony Banks of Genesis. Please like and subscribe. We've got a lot more good stuff coming for you this year. And with that, I'll say good night. Goodbye.